Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
This is pretty scary. Some people broke into a vacant property and they started living there. They were squatting in the property. The investor that this happened to didn't want to come on the podcast and tell her story, but we have her attorney joining us today. David, can you tell me what happened?
Well, I had a client who had gotten engaged and she was moving in with her fiance. They decided that they wanted to keep the home she had been living in and rent it out as an investment. And so they put some money into fixing it up, getting it ready, engaged with a very reputable real estate agent to list the property for lease. And literally on the day that it was listed for rent, a squatter came to the property, broke in, moved in with her two children. And when the real estate agent went to the property to see what was going on, she presented him with a fake lease. He called the police. The police saw the fake lease and they said, well, there's nothing we can do. You're going to have to handle this civilly through the courts. There's nothing that law enforcement can do. And that started a long process that we got involved in order to remove this squatter from her property.
Unbelievable. Well, on the podcast today, we're going to figure out how this got resolved and, more importantly, see what you can do to protect yourself to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. Joining us on the podcast today from Atlanta is David Metzger. We'll take a quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to David. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Investing in rental properties can be complicated, but it doesn't have to be. My friends at Mid-South Home Buyers sell completely rehab turnkey properties in both Memphis and Little Rock, and they've been doing it for 23 years. All their properties come totally rehab. They put on a new roof, new kitchen, new bath, new plumbing, new electric. Everything is brand new. They also have a tenant that's moved in before you close, so you get cash flow on day one. Mid-South Home Buyers also continues to manage the property for you after closing. It couldn't be easier. Everything is 100% done for you. All their properties also come with a couple of guarantees. They have a 1-year total maintenance warranty and a lifetime occupancy guarantee. Personally, I just closed on my 5th property with Mid-South Home Buyers, and I couldn't be happier. If you want to talk to a happy customer, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer any questions, or you can check them out at midsouthhomebuyers.com. David, I feel like I'm hearing more about squatters recently. Is this something that is maybe had an uptick in people doing this?
Absolutely, Dan. I've been practicing as a real estate lawyer since 2011, and prior to 2023, squatting was a very rare phenomenon in the Atlanta metro area where my practice focuses. It was something that I had handled a handful of times, but it was just very, very uncommon, very rare. And really starting in 2023, we saw an explosion of squatter activity in the metro Atlanta area. Again, it was something I had handled or encountered a handful of times leading up to that. And in mid 2023, my law firm was handling well over 100 squatter cases, and we were certainly hearing about many more. And so something changed, something happened. The squatter activity just skyrocketed starting in early 2023.
And I feel like the law is really tilted against the landlords. Like in the case of your clients, it's like the squatters knew what to do. Like they knew to get the fake lease and it just seemed like they weren't randomly doing this. It's like they knew how to do it.
Absolutely. These squatters are informed. They know how to beat the system. Now, I want to emphasize that the system, so to speak, is different in every state. And so, I've heard about squatter activity in other states. Other states have different laws. And so the squatters there trying to beat the system in those states are perhaps doing other things. In Georgia, in the metro Atlanta area, what the squatters were doing was taking advantage of the fact that for years and years and years, police officers have been trained to disengage when they see a lease and determine that this is a landlord-tenant dispute. If a landlord wants to remove a tenant because they're not paying rent or something's going on, they can't just call the police and say, hey, I want you to remove my tenant. They're not welcome here anymore. The police officers, rightly so, know that they have to say, sorry, we can't help you here. This is a civil matter. If you want to remove your tenant, you have to go through the regular landlord-tenant process. You have to file an eviction action in magistrate court. And so the police officers are very well trained that when they see that lease and determine that there's a landlord-tenant matter in play, that they have to disengage. And so the squatters that we're seeing in the metro Atlanta area have figured that out. And what they're doing is they're getting these fake leases off the internet. Some of them are pretty rough, but some are fairly sophisticated. The woman that I told you about in the beginning of this, the squatter had gotten a fake lease, presumably off the internet, and they had actually taken the name of the real estate agent from the listing and put the agent's name on the lease as the landlord. And so it was, a real person's name. They had an electronic signature, so it looked pretty legitimate. And what they're doing is they're showing these to the police, and the police see them and say, this is not something that we can handle right now. There's nothing we can do. And they tell the landlord, you need to take it to the courts. And what the squatters are banking on is that process is going to take some period of time, and they get to stay in the property for free while that is happening.
Even if you say to the police, like, this isn't my lease, like, these aren't my tenants, I don't know who these people are, they broke in the house, like, the police won't even address it or realize that this is a squatter?
In some ways, you understand the police, the position of the police. They're out there on the beat, they get the call, and, asking them to look at the deed record or comparing documents, going through that sort of thing, it may be a little bit too much for them, when they're standing in the front door of a house to make that kind of substantive determination. Now, I have been frustrated when it should be a fairly easy decision for the police officer when, there is signs of breaking and entering, or it's very clear that the squatter is there not as a real tenant. They have no furniture. There's a sleeping bag on the floor and some bags of clothes and things like that. I do think that there are times when it should be a pretty easy call for the police to make. But a lot of times the police will say, listen, there's a lease and I can't, make a decision whether it's valid or not. I'm not in a position to make that call. And so in the end, they default to landlord. You need to go to the courts. There's a civil process for this. That's the remedy that you have.
In the case of these clients that you were talking about at the beginning of the show, what happened? So they went to court, and then, like, is it pretty cut and dry when they get in front of the judge?
Legally, a condition for bringing an eviction action against the tenant in Georgia, a condition for that is that there has to be a landlord-tenant relationship. And so, this would prevent an owner from bringing an eviction action against a co-owner to remove them from the property. The court is going to say, listen, you guys are owners. You have an ownership relationship. You can't bring an eviction action based on that. There has to be a landlord-tenant relationship. And in a true squatter situation where someone has broken into the property and they're unlawfully occupying, there is no landlord-tenant relationship. They're an intruder, a trespasser, a criminal. And so looking at it from a strictly legal sense, there's really not a basis for bringing a regular dispossessory action against a squatter. And, early on in 2023, we had thought of that as sort of a hypothetical scenario. But in 2023, we actually started seeing eviction cases get dismissed in the magistrate court of Fulton County. Fulton County judges were dismissing eviction actions against squatters because they said, look, there's no landlord-tenant relationship here. I don't have the jurisdiction, the authority to remove this person like you're asking me to. And so really, you saw a lot of owners and landlords in kind of this nightmare scenario where they found out they had a squatter, they turned to their agent, their property manager, even lawyers who didn't know, and said, what do I do? And they said, okay, we'll file an eviction action. And at that time, there was a significant backlog in the magistrate courts for eviction actions. So they waited 6-7 months to get a trial. And then they get to the trial and the judge dismisses the case. And then, they're really scratching their head saying, where do I go from here? The police are saying, we can't help you. Go to the courts. We go to the courts, file the eviction action like we think we should. And the judge says, I can't do what you're asking me to do. What am I left with? And so what we were doing at the time is looking at a different law. Georgia has a law on the books called the Intruder Removal Statute, OCGA 44-11-30. A very old law. It's been on the books since before the Civil War. And we have been using this to remove squatters from properties. It's different from the regular eviction process. It's very different from the regular eviction process. And every county is a little different in how they operate it. But in some counties, the court is not involved. You go straight to the sheriff's office, provide them with an affidavit, and the sheriffs go and deliver that affidavit to the squatter. If the squatter did not have a counter affidavit setting forth a good faith claim to be in the property, then the sheriff could remove them right then and there. And so that particular client that I was describing that had found a squatter the first day that they listed their property for lease, that's what we did for that client. We went to the sheriff's office, we got the paperwork. There was, some delay, took a little while, but eventually the sheriffs came out to the property and were able to remove the squatter under that statute, that procedure.
Incredible. How long did that take?
Maybe 2 or 3 months from start to finish until the squatter was removed from the property. What I will tell you is that was in early 2023, and it wasn't long before more and more property owners, landlords, property managers, learned about this statute and this procedure and started doing it to address the squatters that they were confronting. And so the sheriff's offices in the counties in the metro Atlanta area became backlogged. They, had hundreds of these things on the books, and they're pretty labor intensive because for safety concerns, they have to send out several deputies, and, sometimes it can take several hours. So, pretty quickly there was a big backlog. So whereas that one took 2 or 3 months, as I recall, by the end of 2023, we were looking at 6-7 months before the sheriffs would schedule going out to the property.
And that right there is the value in having a good attorney. Like, just to give you a a little pat on the back there that if these people, if your clients had tried to navigate this on their own or had an attorney that wasn't experienced in this and didn't realize the shortcut that you figured out, this thing could have dragged on for a really long time.
Well, that's absolutely right, Dan. And, unfortunately, we saw that play out with a lot of people. I mean, I had clients in 2023 that called us up literally the day after their eviction action got dismissed. And again, they're searching for answers. They're desperate.
Yeah.
Because at that point, they've had an unknown person living in their house that they're paying a mortgage on for, 7-8 months.
Right.
And they felt like they were no closer to getting that criminal out of the property.
Yeah. And it's just so devastating for a landlord when you think you've got 7 or 8 months where you're not getting rent. When you get the property back, who knows what kind of condition it's going to be in and how much you're going to have to spend to fix the property up, plus legal fees and court fees. I mean, this could really put someone in a horrible situation.
Absolutely. It could be devastating. And, a lot of times we're talking about people that are, they're not big corporate landlords or things. I mean, it's a person that, kept a house they used to live in because they want to, make a little something trying to rent it out.
Right.
And, it's unfortunate because the margins there are small. And if you have to deal with this, that can be pretty damaging.
So I think a good way to not have this problem is to figure out how to stop squatters from getting in the property to begin with. What do you think the best thing people can do to protect their house so that this doesn't, they don't even have to go down this road?
Well, Dan, the first thing that they have to be aware of is the risk and what really increases the risk that a squatter is going to come to their property. And in the vast majority of cases that I've personally dealt with, usually what we see is the property has very recently been listed for sale or for lease, and that listing goes online. And so the squatters are able to identify the property as, being out there. And if the photos in the listing show that the property is unoccupied because, it's vacant rooms, that sort of thing, then the squatter knows that they can go and break into that property and, it's a much less of a risk of confrontation because nobody's there. And so, again, I've seen it in that circumstance that I described earlier, where literally it was the day that the property was listed and it hit the internet. That's when the squatter moved in. So if you are, preparing to list a property for lease or for sale, obviously if you're going to do that, these days there's no way to keep it off of the internet. I mean, you want that exposure, but you have to be aware that that's really when your risk skyrockets, because that's when you come on the radar of the squatters.
Right.
So, in terms of when you really need to have your guard up, once it's out there online, that's when you need to be very, very careful. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing would be to, try to take some measures so that you're able to keep tabs on the property if you're not there. So this could be a security system. This could be a camera system. Anything that allows you to be alerted and possibly be able to see what's going on if someone is coming to the property. The other thing, it's pretty low tech, but it's effective, is letting your neighbors, letting the people who live around that property, letting them know that you're about to lease it, you're about to put it up for sale, and you're concerned about squatters. So, here's my cell phone number. If there's anything that seems weird or suspicious, you see people, going around the property, or somebody's moving in the middle of the night, or just something seems off, please call me immediately. That's very, very effective. So I would definitely have a good relationship with your neighbors, communicate with them, let them know that you're about to do this, and just tell them, hey, as a courtesy, if you see something, if something's weird, call me. That can be very effective. Yeah. The best chance that I've seen for getting law enforcement to actually do something is if they are called, the earlier the better. Like literally, if the squatter is in the act of breaking in, it's much more likely that the police are going to treat it as a trespasser, a burglar, someone who's doing breaking and entering. If it's super obvious that the door's broken, the window's broken, it's more likely that they're going to treat it as a true criminal act. If it's days later, weeks later, they've had time to clean all that up and change the locks and everything looks good, it's more likely the police are going to say, no, this is a civil matter. We can't do anything here. So if you have that early warning system, whether it's a security system, cameras that alert you, neighbors, some combination of all three, that can kind of set yourself up to try and get law enforcement to react quickly. The other thing I would say is I would never, ever recommend setting something up so that prospective tenants or buyers or whoever can come to the property unaccompanied by you or someone that represents you. One thing coming out of COVID is, we had these great systems put in place where, there was no person-to-person interaction. Somebody could get a code, they get the code to the lockbox, and they could just go out to the property and let themselves in. I have seen situations where squatters have taken advantage of that. They've posed as prospective tenants and gotten lockbox codes and just gone out to the property, and then they don't even have to break in. They just go in and then they never leave. So I would go old school on this. If you're going to show that property, you need to be there, or someone representing you needs to be there.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Does anything happen to the squatters like after they get kicked out of the property? Like, are they charged criminally with anything?
Dan, in my experience, the answer is no. We're talking about some significant crimes here. I've dealt with squatters in high-end homes in the Atlanta suburbs where, rent was maybe $4,000 a month. Talking about $1 million home, 5,000-6,000 square feet, finished basement, hot tub, like all these things. And, the squatter in that particular property was there for 10 months. That's $40,000 of rent that was essentially stolen.
Right.
And so, the idea that you can have a crime of that magnitude and there's just really no consequence at all is a little mind-boggling.
Wow, that is really scary. Well, if anybody is in Georgia and you need legal help with any of your rentals, I would definitely recommend reaching out to David. He sounds like he's a great attorney. I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 506. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, definitely reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender. She has a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you. You can track her down at ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you hit the follow button. I put out a new interview every single Tuesday, and if you're following the show, you'll never miss an episode. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.